I never imagined a lost letter would change my life. I never imagined a lost letter would change my life. But that's exactly what happened on a cold October morning when the mailman left a yellowed envelope in my mailbox. It was a Saturday. The sky was clear, but the air had that bittersweet scent only autumn knows how to carry. I was still wearing the same blue coat he gave me on our last Christmas together, the last real one. 10 years had passed since Ethan left. 10 years since I heard his voice for the last time, soft and faint, telling me he loved me with a smile that seemed to promise everything would be okay. Even though we both knew it wouldn't, I tried to move on. I really did. I went to therapy, I traveled, I moved to another city. But some pain doesn't go away, it just learns to walk quietly beside you. That morning, while making coffee, something made me walk back to the door. I'm not usually curious about mail. Most of what arrives is bills, flyers, or forgotten cards. But there was something strange about that envelope. There was no return address. The handwriting looked familiar, so familiar that my hand started to shake before I even opened it. Inside, a carefully folded piece of paper. Just one page written in blue ink. The scent. God, that scent. It was his. That warm, woodsy, subtle cologne. And there, in the handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade, were the words that made me sit on the living room floor, heart pounding like I had stepped back in time. If you're reading this, it means something worked. It means time passed and you're still here, alive, strong, beautiful, and I still love you. Even if the world tried to take me away from you, I couldn't breathe right. The letter felt like it was speaking from inside me. Like he was there sitting beside me, his soft eyes looking into mine, saying, "You're not alone." That old pain I thought I had buried deep came back like a wave. But for the first time, it didn't hurt. It warmed me. If you believe in the power of love too, subscribe now for more stories like this. If you believe in the power of love too, subscribe now for more stories like this one. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't just about missing someone. It's about finding them again, even after goodbye. It's about trusting that love has a strange way of surviving time and even death. That morning when I found the letter, I spent nearly an hour just holding the paper in my hands. It felt like I couldn't let go. The envelope rested on my light wooden kitchen table, and the sun was pouring through the window, casting soft shadows that danced across the room, like he was there teasing me again like he used to when he got home early. I remember closing my eyes, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it some kind of cruel prank? Had someone forged his handwriting, his scent, his style? But the letter had details, words only he would use. Phrases that were ours. A private joke about our first meeting in that Portland bookstore when he pretended to need help finding a poetry book just to strike up a conversation. No one else knew that. It was him, somehow. It was him, on the back of the letter there was a smaller note written in slightly shaky handwriting, almost like he was afraid I might miss it. Or maybe he hoped I'd only read it if I was ready. This is just the beginning. There's more. When you're ready, go to our place.
The
view by the lake still holds what I left for you. Our place. Those two words alone made my chest cave in. It was like my soul recognized the call. During the 5 years we were together, we had so many memories, but there was one place that was ours alone, Lake Crescent, in Washington State. Just a few hours from where we lived, we used to escape. There, whenever the world got too loud, I hesitated. A lot. 10 years is a long time to keep a wound quiet, and to reopen it is a risk. The risk of losing what little peace you've managed to build. But something about that letter kept pulling me. It wasn't just longing. It was a sense that something was unfinished, an echo of our story that still needed to be lived. I stared at the letter for days. I remembered every little gesture. How he used to wake me up with pancakes and strong coffee. The way he looked into my eyes before kissing me. His habit of leaving handwritten notes on the mirror or inside the books I was reading. He was always like that ... intense, romantic, one foot on the ground, and the other dancing in the clouds. For a long time, I thought death had won, that it had taken everything he was. But in my hands, I now held proof that Ethan had left behind more than memories. He had left plans, surprises, a path laid out, so that even in his absence, I would still be loved. It took me exactly 5 days to find the courage. The night before my trip to the lake, I slept with the letter under my pillow. And for the first time in years, I dreamed of him without pain. He wore that white shirt, hair tousled by the wind, and smiled at me like he was saying, "It's going to be okay." I woke up with tears in my eyes, but something inside me was lighter. I packed a small bag with simple clothes, my old camera, and a notebook. I hit the road early, windows down. No music, just the wind carrying my thoughts. The scenery changed slowly, like time was moving backward. Each mile brought me closer to us. Not who we were, but who we might still be. When I arrived at Lake Crescent, the sky was clear, mirrored in the still waters. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the quiet was so deep it felt sacred. At the very spot where we used to lay out a blanket and open the cheap wine he loved, there was a small wooden box, weathered, covered in leaves and moss. My heart nearly stopped. Had he really left something there? I walked toward it slowly, afraid I might wake a dream. And when I opened the box, everything changed again. Asterisk. Everything he left behind felt like he knew exactly who I'd become without him. I still remember the texture of the wood. It was a small box with delicate carvings along the edges, like they'd been done slowly, with care, as if each mark was intentional. My fingers were trembling so much that I almost couldn't lift the lid. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the soft whisper of the wind around me. Inside the box was another letter. And more than that, tiny keepsakes, carefully chosen to meet me exactly where I was. Right there, in that moment of my life, the paper was slightly yellowed, as if time itself had waited with it. The handwriting was the same, strong but gentle, those wide strokes he used when he wanted me to read slowly. If you've made it this far, it means you're alive inside. And I knew you would get here, no matter how long it took. Our love doesn't have an expiration date. I felt my eyes sting, the tears returning again, but this time they rolled down my cheeks more gently. Like they weren't about grief anymore, but about reunion. Inside the box, along with the letter, was an old keychain, a tiny silver lighthouse. He'd given me one just like it on our 2nd anniversary. Said it was to remind me that even on my darkest days,
he'd always be my light. There was also a Polaroid of us, taken on our first trip to Lake Crescent.
In the photo, I had my hair tied up messily, wearing one of his oversized t-shirts and laughing, while he made a goofy face behind me. It was a silly image. But in that moment, it felt like a time capsule that had opened just for me. Lastly, there was a map, drawn by hand, the lines uneven and a bit faded, with tiny hearts marking certain places, and a sticky note taped to it that read, "I know you better than anyone. And I knew one day you'd need something to help you remember who you are. So I made you a path. You don't need to rush. Go at your own pace, but go." My God. He created a kind of love scavenger hunt. As if he knew that someday, when everything around me got too quiet, I'd need something, a spark, a trail, a reason to believe again. I looked around. The lake hadn't changed. Nature had guarded this place with reverence, letting it stay. Just as we left it, I held the map in my hand and felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't just about Ethan, it was about me. About remembering. About finding pieces of myself again. I sat by the water's edge, the letter in one hand and the photo in the other, and let the memories come freely. His laughter. The way he said my name, Emily, with that soft drawl I could never resist. The way we'd sit in silence and just watch the trees move. As if the whole world had paused just for us. And in that moment I realized something that cut deep. But beautifully, everything he left behind felt like he already knew exactly who I would become without him. Like he had seen me in the future and picked the perfect stitches to mend the heart I hadn't even broken yet. And it wasn't just about romance. It was about healing. I stood with the map still in hand and started walking along the narrow trail. Following the first marker he had drawn. Every step felt like I was stepping through time. Like I was beginning to feel again. Like I was gently beginning again. Not far from there. Nestled between two tall oaks whose branches almost touched at the top, I found another surprise. A small glass jar tucked between the roots, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Inside it, a rolled-up note. Day 1. Smile, for real, today, and find me at the next stop, when you smell fresh bread. It was so playful, loving, attuned to the tiniest details that made life feel full. I stayed there for several minutes, letting the moment wrap itself around me. It was like he was still guiding me, not haunting me, not lingering in sorrow, but gently pointing me back toward life. And for the first time in 10 years, I smiled without guilt. I was beginning to understand that love, when it's real, doesn't end. It just changes form and maybe it turns into a map. Asterisk, it felt like he knew exactly where I'd need to stop, to remember who I used to be. I don't know how long I stood there, holding that note in my hands, my heart thudding like a steady drumbeat. The little glass jar still rested at the base of the tree, as if it had been waiting patiently through all those seasons, through all my forgetting. And that ribbon, it was the same shade of blue as the scarf Ethan wore on our last winter together. He said it made his eyes look like the sky. He wasn't wrong. Day 1. Smile, for real, today, and find me at the next stop. When you smell fresh bread. He knew me. Better than I knew myself. He knew that with time, my smile would become something practiced, polite, brief. That laughter would turn quiet, held at the corners of my mouth like a secret I no longer gave away. He knew that joy would become something I rationed. And he knew that nothing could bring me back faster than the smell of bread. Warm, soft, familiar. It had always been our Sunday tradition. Ethan would wake up early, earlier than necessary, and make bread, even if it came out too hard, even if the bottom burned. He always said the best bread was the one made with love, not measurements. Now he was telling me, follow with your senses, not just your memories. I walked down the forest path slowly, holding the map he'd drawn, trying to remember where in this area I could possibly catch the scent of bread. Baking. My steps were quiet, careful. Each tree I passed felt like a doorway. Each patch of light breaking through the branches felt like a whisper. And then I saw it, a small wooden storefront tucked just off the trail, half hidden by ferns and thyme. I hadn't remembered it right away, but when I stood in front of it, something clicked. We had been there once, only once. A rustic bakery in the woods, a place we stumbled into during a weekend trip. We'd laughed so much that day, trying pastries with names we couldn't pronounce. And now I was back. The front door creaked slightly when I opened it. The inside was warm, with soft lighting and the heavenly smell of bread everywhere. Sweet, earthy, perfect. An older woman stood behind the counter, arranging loaves into baskets. She looked up at me with kind, knowing eyes. You must be Emily, right? I froze. My throat tightened. My hands trembled. I nodded slowly. No words came. She smiled softly, walked to the back room, and returned with a small brown package and a fresh, warm loaf. He said you'd come one day. Didn't matter when, just that you would. He asked me to give you this, with fresh bread, always. I sat down at the corner table by the window, the one we had shared that day long ago. My hands, still shaking slightly, opened the little parcel. Inside, a leather-bound notebook, old, weathered, beautiful, thick yellowed pages, worn corners. I opened it carefully. On the first page, his handwriting, large and familiar, filled the space with intention. This is your healing journal. Here, I want you to write everything you feel from now on. And when you've filled every page, you'll understand what I knew all along. You were always meant to go on living. I closed my eyes, held the notebook close to my chest. It was as if he had known exactly when I would need this. Not right after he was gone, but much, much later, when the world was quieter, when grief had grown into something silent and private. He hadn't just left memories. He had left tools, steps, comfort in the shape of letters and pages. I sat there for what felt like hours. I wrote. I described the birds outside the window, the way the cinnamon tasted on the crust, the warmth of the chair, the sound of the bakery's old radio playing a soft melody. And at the bottom of the page, for the first time in 10 years, I wrote something I didn't expect. Today. I smiled for real. Tucked inside the last page was another small note. After you finish your coffee, go to the apple orchard. What you'll find there will remind you of who you used to be. And who you still are. I folded the journal gently, placed it in my bag, and took one last sip of the warm coffee. And then I stood up with the map in my hand and the quietest courage in my heart. I didn't know exactly what was waiting for me at that orchard, but I knew this. I was ready to meet myself again. It felt like time was giving me back, piece by piece, the woman I used to be. That night was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that aches. It was the kind that wraps around you gently, like a soft blanket on a cold evening. I carried the leather journal to bed with me, holding it like a fragile secret. Ethan's words echoed in my mind, not as a haunting, but as a thread. A golden thread pulling me, slowly, back to a part of myself I thought had died with him. I placed the notebook on the knitstand, lit the small lamp beside the bed, and sat for a while with my hands wrapped around a cup of herbal tea. I didn't open my phone, didn't scroll, didn't fill the air with noise. I just listened to the silence, and in it I found him. The next morning I woke early. The sky was pale, painted in soft layers of pink and gray. There was something in the air, not just mist, but that specific kind of stillness that only happens when something important is about to begin. I tucked the map into my coat pocket, laced up my worn sneakers, and left the small inn without a real plan, other than following Ethan's next note. Go to the apple orchard. What you find there will remind you of who you were and who you still are. I knew exactly which orchard he meant. We'd gone there one autumn, early in our relationship. It had rained that day, and I remember we stayed anyway, slipping in the mud, laughing like children, filling a basket and forgetting to pay attention to the time. The drive was peaceful. Winding roads lined with trees, their branches bending low, as if whispering encouragement. When I arrived, the orchard was quiet, off-season, but the trees were still there, standing tall, proud, timeless. I walked between the rows, slowly, as if stepping into a memory. And there, at the center of the field, hanging from the oldest apple tree, was a swing, a wooden swing, simple, sturdy, familiar, A small envelope was tied to the rope. My heart tightened. His handwriting. I touched the paper with a kind of reverence. That words can't quite hold. It was slightly weathered, soft at the corners, as if it had waded through sun and rain and wind just for me. If you found this, you're ready to remember. To remember who you were before the world asked you to be quiet. To remember the lightness in your laugh, the softness in your joy. This orchard was your place, even more than mine. This is where I saw your spirit dance, even when your feet were still. This is where you were free. Sit, swing, breathe, and let yourself return. I folded the letter slowly. Sat down on the swing. At first, I was stiff, unsure, awkward, but as my feet pushed gently against the earth, the wood beneath me began to sway, and soon the breeze took over. My hair danced in the wind, my eyes closed, and for a few fleeting seconds I felt it. I felt her. That version of me I thought was gone, the one who laughed without guarding it, the one who trusted, the one who believed in the magic of little things. I stayed there for a long time. Not thinking, just feeling. When I finally stood, I noticed a small stone tucked into the tree's roots. And beneath it, another note, Day 2. Write about today. And find me again when you hear a song that feels like a memory. That was Ethan. Always blending poetry with purpose. Leaving me crumbs of love, scattered in places where grief had tried to take root. Back at the inn, I wrote in the journal. Today, I met myself again, the girl I thought I lost. The version of me who didn't flinch at joy. She's still here. She just needed a little help finding her way back. I closed the notebook and placed it gently beside my pillow, for the first time. In 10 years, I wasn't surviving the past. I was walking toward the future, and Ethan. He wasn't behind me, he was with me. In every breath, every page, every orchard breeze, asterisk, it felt like time was returning, piece by piece, the woman I used to be. That night, the quiet felt full, not empty, not heavy, not sad. It was the kind of quiet that lets you feel every part of your body again. Your heartbeat, your breath, your place in the world. And for the first time in years, I didn't resist it. I returned to the inn just before sunset. The sky was turning into a soft watercolor of gold and violet, and the last birds were stitching the air with their slow, tired songs in my room. The leather journal waited on the knitstand, and next to it the map, now a little more wrinkled, a little more loved. I looked at it not with fear this time, but with curiosity. In the top right corner, a small symbol I hadn't noticed before had been drawn, a tiny musical note, and next to it, Sequim. My heart gave a familiar little skip. Music. Ethan and I had always shared that part of ourselves through music. It was our language when words felt too small. We had playlists for everything, road trips, rainy days, lazy Sunday mornings. He used to say that the third track was always the most emotional. Not the introduction, not the goodbye. The middle, he'd say. That's where the heart lives. So the next morning I followed the map again, this time to the small town of Sequim, just over an hour away. Nestled between lavender fields and sleepy bookstores, I drove slowly, windows down, letting the wind carry thoughts I didn't need to name. The air smelled clean, and somewhere deep in my chest, I felt an unexpected calm. Sequim was quiet, almost storybook-like. The sidewalks were lined with flower boxes, and handwritten signs hung in the windows of the shops. It felt untouched by hurry. It felt like it had been waiting for me, too, on a side street near the center of town. I found the place marked on the map, the Vinyl Room, a small record shop tucked between a cafe and an antique store. The sign was hand-painted and weathered. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. But I was when I stepped inside. The scent of dust and wood and old cardboard sleeves wrapped around me like an old jacket. The woman behind the counter looked up, smiled, and said, without hesitation, "You must be Emily." I nodded, speechless once again. How many people had he trusted with pieces of this journey? And how carefully had he chosen them? She reached below the counter and pulled out a vinyl sleeve, then placed a small brown envelope on top. "He said when you came, we should play track 3. She walked to the record player, placed the needle down, and let it spin. The sound filled the room slowly, a few soft scratches, then the guitar. Then the first words, Harvest Moon. I didn't have to hear the rest. I already knew. It was our song. The first time we danced to it, we were barefoot on the kitchen floor. There was wine on the counter and pasta boiling over, and he twirled me like we were somewhere far away, not in a tiny apartment with flickering lights and cracked tile. I sat down near the speakers. Tears fell quietly, not from pain, but from the simple act of being remembered so well. I opened the envelope. This is our song, Emily. Even if you hear it alone, I want you to know I'm still dancing with you. Wherever you go, I didn't leave you just memories. I left you rhythm. I left you melody. I left you this song to remind you that real love never needs to be loud. It lives in quiet places, like your breath, your pulse, the way your eyes close. When you feel safe, let it carry you, let it hold you. Let it be your next step. On the back of the lyric sheet tucked inside the sleeve was another note. Now go to the bookstore around the corner. In the poetry section between Dickinson and Rilke, you'll find the next piece. I placed the record sleeve against my chest and closed my eyes. How is it possible for someone to keep loving you so well, even after they're gone? He gave me poetry for the days when even I didn't believe in words anymore. I've always believed books are alive, that every page carries more than just sentences. It holds breath, silence, memory. But that morning, between the tall wooden shelves of the bookstore just around the corner from the vinyl room, I felt that truth settle deep into my bones. The shop was small, charming, and quiet. The kind of quiet that listens. Sunlight filtered through the windows, dancing across the spines of books like fingers brushing over old piano keys. The smell of paper dust, something warm and timeless, welcomed me like a familiar voice. I walked toward the poetry section. And there, between Emily Dickinson and Rainer Maria Rilke, I found it. A small envelope, pale brown, worn at the edges, tucked gently between two aging hardcovers like it had always belonged there. Written across the front, in his unmistakable handwriting, read slowly, with your heart. I stood for a long moment just holding it, the weight of it, the knowing of it. There was a chair in the back corner of the store, old with creaking legs and a velvet seat faded from years of waiting. I sat down with the envelope resting in my lap like something sacred. Inside were 3 folded sheets of thick, cream-colored paper, and when I unfolded the first, I already knew this wasn't just a letter. It was a gift. A small, trembling piece of Ethan's soul. Emily, if you're reading this, it means your heart has stayed soft. It means that somewhere inside you there's still belief. Or maybe, you're just starting to believe again. That counts too. I wanted to give you something for the days when you can't explain the ache, for the mornings when coffee tastes like nothing, for the nights when silence feels too loud. I wanted to give you poetry. Because poems know how to hold pain without fixing it. They let it breathe. They sit beside it quietly. You don't need to understand every line, just feel them. I turned the page and there they were, his words, his verses. His rhythm. Written not as declarations but as soft reminders. Let your longing be a window, not a wall. Let your tears fall like rain, watering something unseen. Let your grief hum like an old song, one that knows every word of your name. Let my memory be your shadow in the sun, not your anchor in the dark. I was crying before I even reached the last page, not loudly, not with sobs. Just a slow, steady letting go. He had written me through the pain. He had reached across time to hand me something more than a goodbye. He handed me permission to keep feeling, to still hurt, to still love. Tucked inside the last page, scribbled with that familiar curve of his letters, was a postscript. P.S. There's a book somewhere in this store that belongs to you. You lent it to me once and never asked for it back. Look for it inside ... of something just for you. My heart smiled before my lips did, because I knew exactly which book he meant, The Time Traveler's Wife. He used to tease me for crying every time I finished it. But secretly, I think he loved it just as much as I did. Said it reminded him that some love stories bend time and still find their way back. I walked to the shelf where it should be. There. It was burgundy cover, bent spine, soft with age. I opened it. Inside the front cover, taped gently in place, was a small black velvet box. My breath caught. Inside, a pair of delicate silver earrings shaped like tiny leaves.
The same design
as the ones he gave me on our first anniversary. The ones I lost during a walk in the rain. I'd cried for hours. He never replaced them. Or so I thought, but he had.
He just saved them for now. Tucked beneath the box was a small note. Some things get lost.
But that doesn't mean they're gone forever. Wear these when you're ready. To remember ... how beautiful you still are. I stood in front of the bookstore mirror and placed the earrings in my ears. My reflection didn't look younger. Didn't look unchanged. But she looked alive, and I could almost hear him, smiling through the pages, through the shelves, through the space he once held beside me, on the back cover of the book. In small handwriting, now go where time stands still. Where only the ocean speaks. I left something there. For you to hear. Asterisk at the edge of the ocean, love speaks without needing words. The drive to La Push Beach felt like crossing a timeline inside myself. Every curve of the road reached into memories I'd buried so deeply, I almost believed they had dissolved. But they hadn't. They were waiting, tucked into the trees, folded into the fog, sitting quietly between one breath and the next. The sky was overcast, heavy with soft gray clouds, the kind that don't threaten but blanket. The air smelled like salt, pine, and something else, something old and sacred. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to. There was a soundtrack inside me now, a mix of letters, laughter, and the soft echo of Ethan's voice, still living between the lines of every page he'd left behind. When I reached La Push, the world went quiet in the way only nature knows how. The tide was low. The beach was empty, stretching wide like a whispered invitation. Waves moved slowly, not crashing but breathing. That's what Ethan used to say about this place, that the ocean here didn't roar. It listened. I stepped onto the wet sand and walked toward the curve of the shore, where the driftwood gathered like forgotten stories. Everything felt unchanged. And yet, something in me was different. Then I saw it, a simple wooden bench, old, weather-worn, tucked between two large rocks, facing the sea, and on top of the bench, a small vintage radio, and next to it, another envelope. I walked toward it slowly, my hands already trembling, not from fear, but from the strange, beautiful weight of being loved this way. So intentionally, so endlessly. I sat down, the cold of the woods seeping through my coat. The sea in front of me stretched out into the fog like a promise with no end. I picked up the envelope. My name was written across it in soft, slanted ink, tuned to 88.3 FM at 3 p.m. I looked at my phone. 2:56.4 minutes. I didn't open the letter yet. I placed it on my lap and let the silence settle. The wind tousled my hair. The ocean hummed. My breath slowed. At exactly 3 p.m. I turned the dial. Static. Then his voice. Ethan. Clear, steady, soft. If you're hearing this, Emily, it means you came. It means the ocean called you the same way it always called us. I recorded this on a good day. One of the few I had left where my voice still felt like mine. I wanted to give you a moment. Just one. To hear me say, I still love you. Not in a clinging way, not in a sad way, but in the way waves keep coming even after the boat sails on. His message lasted 2.5 minutes. Every second. A lifetime. He spoke of love, of release, of peace. And at the end, he said something I'll never forget. Emily, when you think it's over, go back to the beginning. Go to where it all started. There's one more thing waiting for you. Then silence, not a painful one, but full, like the end of a song that stays in your chest long after the music stops. I opened the envelope on my lap. Inside was a small card with a single line. Portland. Our bookstore. The last surprise is waiting. I stared at the sea a long time after that because something had shifted. I wasn't just being guided through grief anymore. I was being led back to life, and I realized I was no longer afraid to return to the beginning. Going back to the beginning was never about starting over. It was about realizing love never ended. The drive back to Portland felt different from every other trip I had taken before. Not because of the road or the time, but because of what I was carrying inside. It was like a new heart had quietly woken up in my chest. A heart that still remembered loss, yes, but now also remembered hope. It took just over 4 hours, the highway winding through tall pine trees and soft rain clinging to the windshield. The time felt suspended. Every mile didn't just bring me closer to a city. It brought me closer to myself. By the time I reached the street of our old bookstore, the sun was beginning to fall behind the buildings, casting everything in a golden, forgiving glow. The sidewalks were slick from earlier rain. The windows reflected a version of Portland I hadn't seen in over a decade. But the storefront, the bookstore, it was the same. Dark wood, faded gold letters painted across the sign. The small bell above the door that used to make Ethan laugh. I parked the car and took a deep breath, glancing into the rearview mirror. I put on the silver leaf earrings he'd given me, ran my fingers gently over the collar of my coat, and for the first time in years I looked at myself and saw someone whole. Not untouched, not unchanged, but whole. I walked through the bookstore doors and felt the years collapse around me. The scent of old paper and worn leather. The quiet hum of someone turning pages in a back corner. The hush that only places full of stories can carry. The woman behind the counter, older now, kind, looked up and smiled in a way that said she knew. You're Emily, aren't you? I nodded. She asked me to give this to you when you came back. Said it might take a year or 10. But that you would come. She handed me a package, wrapped in craft paper and tied with twine. Simple, plain, perfect. I left the shop slowly. Carried the package like something fragile. Walked 2 blocks to the little park where Ethan and I had once spent an entire afternoon doing absolutely nothing, eating sandwiches. Lying in the grass, watching clouds like they were a movie. I sat on a bench, the same one we had shared. The city moved around me, but I was still, and then I opened it. Inside, a copy of Letters to a Young Poet. Our favorite. The one we used to read to each other in the kitchen, in bed, on the porch during rainstorms. But when I opened it, I saw this wasn't just a book. It was the final letter, tucked inside the first page, in the handwriting I could recognize with. My eyes closed. Emily, if you're here, it means you made it. You walked through every memory, every echo, every quiet ache. You found the pieces I left, but more importantly, you found yourself. This is my last letter. Not because I'm gone, but because you're ready. You don't need instructions anymore. You don't need my voice to guide your next step. Because now your voice is back. Your hands are open. Your heart is strong. You don't have to live for me. Live for you. Live for what's still ahead. Live for the beauty I always saw in you, especially when you couldn't see it yourself.
Let
This be the letter you carry when there are no more letters. The one that says, you are love, you are light, you are home. I held the page against my chest, eyes closed, tears falling again, but they were different now, lighter, sweeter, grateful. He had written me all the way back to myself. With patience, with kindness. With love so wide it had survived everything. Even time, going back to the beginning, was never about starting over. It was about realizing that real love never ended. It just waited and watched. And cheered from the quiet places. Until I was ready to return. Asterisk, he didn't just leave me letters. He left me the courage to begin again. That night, I stayed in a small inn near the bookstore. It was nothing fancy, floral curtains, creaky floorboards, the scent of lavender. Sachets tucked into the pillowcase. But there was something comforting in its simplicity. The kind of place where time seems to slow down just enough to let you feel things. Not just remember them. I placed the final letter beside me on the knit stand. Along with the journal, the earrings, the photo, the swing note, the bread shop napkin, all the pieces of him I had gathered over the past few days, and all the pieces of myself I hadn't realized I was gathering. 2. I sat at the small writing desk by the window and opened the leather-bound journal again. The same one he had given me after the first letter. Only this time, I didn't write about the past. I wrote about now. Tonight I feel full, not of sadness, not of answers, just presence. I am here, I am alive, I am becoming. The lamp flickered slightly. Outside the city was quiet. The kind of quiet only someone who has lived through storms can truly appreciate. And I thought of him, not in the way that used to break me, but in the way that now builds me. He didn't leave me letters. He left me courage to feel again, to trust again, to begin again, and somewhere between the bakery, the orchard, the bookstore, the bench by the ocean, I had crossed a bridge I didn't even know I was walking, one from morning to meaning. The next morning I didn't set an alarm. I let the light wake me. Soft, unhurried, like everything inside me now. I poured a cup of coffee, wrapped myself in the thick gray sweater he used to steal from my closet, and sat at the window with the final letter once more resting in my lap. I opened it again, not to read it but just to feel close. To let the ink and the paper remind me that not all goodbyes are meant to be permanent. Some just make space for something new. There was a line in the letter I had overlooked the night before, one that now struck me differently. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to live honestly. That's enough. I took a deep breath. Because for so long I had been trying to move on, trying to feel better. Trying to look okay, trying to fill the space he left behind, but he never wanted me to move on.
He just wanted me to move forward. There's a difference.
And I understand that now moving on suggests leaving something behind, but moving forward is carrying it with grace. I closed the journal gently, folded the letter, pressed it between the pages where my words now lived, side by side with his. And then I stood up, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't see someone grieving. I saw someone growing, someone who had loved deeply.
Lost.
Deeply. And still chose to stay open. He had given me memories. But more than that, he had given me permission. To live. To love again someday. To laugh without guilt. To cry without shame. To belong to the world again, not just in body, but in soul. And as I stepped outside, feeling the morning air kiss my face, I realized something that nearly knocked the breath out of me. He didn't save me. He taught me how to save myself. One letter at a time, one place at a time, one heartbeat at a time. Some goodbyes don't mean it's over. They just mean the story changed form. The air felt different when I stepped outside. Not warmer, not cooler, just clearer, like something had lifted, like my lungs had more space, like the world had rearranged itself ever so slightly to make room for me again. It was a small shift. But I noticed it, and that was enough. I didn't have a plan for the day. I wasn't following a map anymore. No more arrows. No more envelopes. No more Ethan. At least not in the way he had been before, and yet he was still everywhere. In the quiet hum of the city. In the coffee shop I passed with jazz playing through the open door. In the soft gray of the clouds above me, his favorite kind of sky. He was no longer leaving breadcrumbs. But his presence was still threaded through the fabric of my life. Just I walked with no particular direction, letting memory lead. Letting instinct guide. Eventually, I found myself at the old rose garden near the river, the one we used to visit in spring. Ethan always said it smelled like forgiveness there. I never understood what he meant until that day. The blooms were full, wide open, soft petals. Earth beneath them still damp from last night's rain. The scent was delicate, not overpowering, but steady. Grounding. I sat on the same bench where he once read poetry to me out loud, his voice low and serious even when the poem was silly. He always read with his whole chest, like words mattered, like they were sacred. And in that moment, surrounded by roses and distant river sounds, I realized something I hadn't let myself say before. I was going to be okay. Not because I'd forgotten, not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because I had finally stopped fighting the love. I had let it change. Let it become something else. A memory. A lesson. A part of my inner world that no one could touch. But everyone could feel if they came close enough. Some goodbyes don't mean it's over. They just mean the story changed form. It took me so long to understand that. To accept that I could carry him with me without carrying the ache. Now the weight had shifted. From burden to blessing. I opened the journal again and wrote beneath yesterday's entry. Today, I didn't look for him. But I found him anyway. That was the difference now. I didn't need signs. I didn't need letters. Because he had built something inside me that lasted longer than any paper. It was love, but also trust. Trust that I could go on, that I could build new memories, new chapters, new dreams, not in place of him, but because of what he gave me. He had always believed in the version of me that could stand alone, even when ID single quotes T. So now I began walking as that woman. Not the girl waiting by the mailbox. Not the one frozen in grief, but the one who had walked through every letter, every silence, every impossible goodbye. And was still here. Healing didn't come like lightning. It came like breath, steady, unnoticed, and real. There was no grand moment, no fireworks, no flash of light. No scene where everything suddenly made sense and I shouted, "I'm healed." That's not how it happened. Healing came like breath. Like something so soft I didn't even notice it at first. But it was there, showing up in the spaces where pain used to echo. Showing up in my hands as I made breakfast. In my eyes when I caught my reflection and didn't look away. In the silence when I didn't feel afraid of it anymore. I spent the next morning walking through the streets of Portland with no purpose other than being. I sat in a small cafe on the corner of a street Ethan and I used to wander. Ordered a muffin I didn't recognize and smiled when it tasted like cinnamon. And memory. There was a girl at the next table, reading a book I used to love. And I caught myself wanting to tell her to pay attention. That book is going to break your heart in the best way. But I didn't say anything. Some things are better discovered quietly. Later, I had passed a mural I'd never noticed before. A giant painting of a dandelion, seeds floating in the wind like tiny wishes. And suddenly, without warning, I remembered something Ethan once said. You don't have to scream your dreams into the world. You can whisper them, the ones meant for you will hear. It hit me so gently that I laughed. Out loud, right there on the sidewalk. And I didn't care who saw, because that laugh was real. It wasn't a mask. It wasn't meant to make someone else feel better. It was mine. That's how I knew I had crossed a line I'd been standing on for 10 years. The line between surviving and living. It's strange how grief can stay hidden in the smallest corners of your life. In the jacket you haven't worn since the day you said goodbye. In the half-used bottle of shampoo he liked the smell of. In the song you skip every time because it knows too much. But love, it hides too. In the soft way your hands still remember how to write your name. In the quiet strength that shows up on the days you thought you couldn't rise. In the hope that returns not as a roar, but as a whisper. That day I didn't find a letter. There was no envelope, no map, no bench, no new instructions. And that was the point, because he had led me to the edge of something sacred and trusted me to walk the rest on my own. It wasn't abandonment. It was faith. I sat by the river that evening, watching the light stretch across the water like gold threads sewn into the surface. The city behind me hummed softly, but I didn't feel lost in the noise. I felt home. I pulled out the journal and wrote just 4 words. I'm not afraid anymore. I closed the book, not because the story had ended, but because the next chapter was mine to write. I stopped asking when the pain would end. I started asking how deeply I had loved. There was a time, not long ago, when I used to mark the calendar every year the day Ethan left, the anniversary of the goodbye. I would circle it in, red, and brace for it. Build walls around it like I was preparing for a storm. And every time it came, I'd collapse. As if loss could somehow grow sharper with age. But this year, it came and I didn't even notice, not because I forgot. I could never forget, but because I had finally stopped treating pain like an enemy. It had become something else. A part of me that didn't scream anymore, just lived quietly beside my joy. I no longer asked, when will this end? I started asking, how lucky was I to feel this much? How beautiful is it that I got to love him that deeply? We live in a world that rushes us through grief, tells us to move on, to find closure, to start again. But no one ever told me that love doesn't end just because someone's gone. It doesn't need a final scene. It doesn't need permission to stay. It transforms. It softens. It builds new rooms in your heart, ones where joy and sorrow can sit at the same table and not argue. And so, I stopped apologizing for still feeling him. I stopped hiding the way his memory would visit me in the middle of an ordinary moment. At the grocery store, when I passed the pasta he used to cook. In a bookstore, when I saw a title he once read to me out loud, in music, in scent, in language. He was gone, but he was here. And instead of resisting it, I started letting it be. That week, I returned to Lake Crescent. Not because a letter told me to. Not because a map guided me, but because I wanted to. Because I was ready to stand in that place not as a mourner, but as someone who had walked through the fire and come out softer. The lake was still.
The air
Tasted of pine and memory. The swing was still there. The box beneath the tree, gone. Of course! But the space it left behind still held something invisible. I sat on the swing and let the silence settle around me. Birds called in the distance. Wind brushed against my face like a familiar hand. And then I spoke, not out loud. Not for anyone else. But inside me. Thank you, I whispered. For loving me so completely. for planning a way for me to keep going when I couldn't see the path, for reminding me who I am. I closed my eyes and remembered that version of me from 10 years ago, the one who had fallen apart, the one who had stopped singing, stopped dreaming, stopped believing, and I wanted to hold her, tell her it was going to be okay. Not perfect, not painless, but okay, because she would survive. She would love again. She would remember how to laugh. She would come back, and she would carry him, not like a wound, but like a quiet flame. That's what real love does. Doesn't keep you stuck. It sets you free. Asterisk. Some hearts don't need to be filled again. They just need to be held. It happened on a Tuesday. A perfectly ordinary day. The kind of day where nothing extraordinary is supposed to happen. I was walking through the farmer's market downtown, the same one Ethan and I used to visit in the fall. Pumpkins stacked in wooden crates. Baskets of apples, jars of honey, flowers tied with twine. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that wakes you gently. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking for signs. I wasn't searching for messages in the clouds or whispers in the wind. I was simply present. That in itself felt like a small miracle. I reached for a jar of blackberry jam, Ethan's favorite, and someone else reached at the same time. Our hands brushed, and I laughed out. It was instinctive light, not the kind of laugh that comes from politeness, but the kind that escapes without permission. He laughed too. And when I looked up, he smiled. Not the kind of smile that demands anything, but the kind that simply says, "I see you," he said. "You can take it." I'm more of a strawberry guy anyway. We both smiled, and that was it. No sparks, no grand music, just something gentle. I walked away with the jam in my hands and a quiet flutter in my chest. Not guilt, not confusion, just warmth. Later, I sat at home with a slice of toast and that same jam, and for a moment I felt them both. Ethan, and whatever this new feeling was, I didn't know what it meant. Didn't try to define it, because here's the thing: no one tells you about moving forward. You don't have to replace love. You don't have to let go of what was in order. To let in what could be, some hearts don't need to be filled again. They just need to be held gently, respectfully, patiently. That night I lit a candle and opened the journal again. The one Ethan had given me at the very beginning. The one that had followed me through every stop of this journey. I flipped through the pages, some tear-stained, some full of joy, some just quiet, each one a thread in a tapestry I hadn't realized I was weaving. At the very back of the journal, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small envelope tucked into the binding, faded, sealed with wax. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single card, no long message. Just 6 words written in Ethan's handwriting. "When you smile again, it counts." I closed my eyes and I did smile, really smile. The kind that comes not from forgetting, but from remembering. In peace, I placed the card beside my bed. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like I was chasing ghosts. I felt like I was living. Ethan had given me permission to keep going. And now, I was giving it to myself. Asterisk. The end wasn't goodbye. It was an invitation to begin again. I always thought the end would feel louder, more final, more like a door slamming shut. But it didn't. It felt like standing in sunlight after a long season of shade. It felt like silence, not empty but full. It felt like breathing, real breathing. The kind where your chest doesn't ache and your shoulders stop trying to hold the whole sky. I didn't know this was the end of the letters until I woke up one morning and didn't expect one. Not because I didn't want to hear from him. I always will. But because I no longer needed to be led. Ethan had walked me to the edge of myself, to the edge of grief, to the edge of memory. And now it was my turn to keep going. There were no more instructions, no more keys, no more riddles or trails. Just me, my life, My next breath, I stood in the kitchen, barefoot. The morning light stretching across the floor like it was painting the day fresh. The smell of coffee filled the air. A quiet song played in the background, not our song, but one I liked. And I realized I wasn't afraid of liking new things anymore. I wasn't afraid of building new memories, even if he wasn't in them, because in some way,
He always would be. Every kindness I offer, every truth I speak.
every joy I allow myself to feel, that's where he lives now. Not in shadows, not in sorrow, but in the way I live. I pulled the journal from the shelf, the same one that traveled with me through the bakery, the orchard, the bookstore, the beach, the bench. And I opened to the very last page. I didn't plan what I'd write. I just let my heart speak. This is not the end. This is the day I choose to begin again, not without you, but with everything you gave me. Love that was never meant to hold me back, only to carry me forward. I closed the cover and I smiled, because I wasn't standing in ruins anymore. I was standing in a garden. One that Ethan helped plant, but one that I would grow. I walked out the door and into the world, not waiting for signs, but open to wonder. And somewhere deep inside me, where his voice still echoes softly, I heard it. You made it, Emily. You didn't just survive. You came back to life. And that was the most beautiful love story of all.